Hello, everyone. Waiting for people to join right now. Probably will start about 5 minutes in. So if you're watching this video after the fact, um, you can probably go ahead and just skip to the 5 minute mark, because I know some people join a little late and the stream takes a little bit to get up. But today we're just going to mostly be covering the Lab 2 topics, um, which cover mostly lists, for loops, and while loops. And then answer any questions people might have regarding any of the homeworks, and then maybe dive into some of the topics that will be covered by the second homework, which is released now, and I added an extra date to when it was due, so now it's due like Tuesday at noon since I was a day late getting that out from when I told y'all. And I'll also make an announcement about that probably when this video gets published. So, gonna write in the chat. Also, I guess just kind of a note. I've had a few people use some of the flex days for like labs and homeworks and all, which is totally fine. There's, I think, what, five for the course. Um, and I think on the syllabus it says to email me with it. If you like do forget to email me, um, or whatever, I will like automatically use a flex day for you. Um, even if you didn't email me, it makes it way easier if you do email me. But when the course is ending and it's like calculating grades and it's super easy to tell like when stuff is late on Canvas, which is nice. So I will automatically like apply flex days for you. So if you like never emailed me and submitted three homeworks late by a day, then that would be three flex days. You have five, so it's like you didn't submit anything late, which is fine. And hopefully five is enough. I know last year I think it was only like two or three, which I didn't feel like was enough, especially with a lot of people working jobs and traveling and such. So, and I mean the late penalty isn't that terrible either, but because I know life gets busy and such. All right, we'll start in like a minute, maybe less than a minute. Just wanted to wait till five after. Also, again, while I'm doing this, I'm just gonna work through the lab. Feel free to interrupt. Um, Type anything in the chat. For regrades, so uh, let me refer to the syllabus to make sure I'm not like contradicting myself. Um, do I have anything on here? I do have stuff about regrades, do I not? Yeah, it's a dash, nice. Um, yeah, so tomorrow I will return like all the graded stuff. Um, and if you think, you basically it's like if you think I didn't grade a part properly, um, or you think you deserve like more points on something than what you were given, you can just kind of email me and I guess put regrade in the subject line or the course. Either works to kind of signal. And then, I'll look at it again and give you a response, basically. I guess kind of related to that too, if you do get something graded back and you don't have like a regrade question, but you're like, oh, I got this, like, I do give feedback on stuff, and so hopefully that's enough. But if it's not, and you're like, oh, I got half points on this, like, I'm not sure why, and you're not really asking for a regrade, you just like want to know, that's also totally fine. All right, so I'm going to start. So I'm going to type in the chat. We're going to start solve the lab. No, there's no option to redo. But there was like the flex days and late days. You can just like kind of do it late, but I would say I'm like a quote unquote nice grader though. So if you like showed your work and like tried, that's good. But if you just submit like the downloaded document that's like blank, like this, and then like you get a 0 or whatever, and then like 2 weeks after you're like, oh, can I redo it? I'd be like, yeah, let's dive in. So the first part, I hope this wasn't confusing. I thought that the last lab we had, it was like a text file or PDF or whatever you wanted to submit in addition to this, and I was like, oh, we could just wrap it into the same Python file, especially for this kind of thing where it's mostly one-line answers that are code. So hopefully people didn't have trouble with that. Um, I just think it makes it a little easier on both ends. And yeah, I hope it wasn't too hard to read or anything. And if you put it in a function like this, then it won't mess it up when you run the file. So I can still call these two methods. So that's kind of why I had it in this thing. But, the whole lab was kind of segmented. This first part clearly about lists, number of digits. You could solve it multiple ways, but the intention for that one was like a while loop. And then alternate strings was a for. Um, but for the lab, there was no, you didn't have to solve it a certain way. It's however, whatever you wrote that gets it correct, you're good. But that's just kind of the intention, which is kind of how all the homeworks will go. If you are kind of stuck, it's like, oh, especially for this current homework too that's out now. Um, I think I even say it in the instructions, but it's like, a for loop will make a certain problem really easy, and a while loop will make this problem easy. Um, And for two of them, I actually ask you solve it with a for loop and a while loop just to make sure that those concepts are there for everyone. But we'll dive into this list thing. So I provided these two for you because I figured that after doing the OLI module, you probably know how to do these for sure. Um, and I also wanted to give you an example of how to kind of format your answers. So making an empty list, you just make a variable name it whatever, aside from a keyword, like list. So I tend to do like my list. Um, you can name it L, you can name it whatever you want, but something more descriptive is better. Um, since I did want to denote it's a list, I just said my list. And this is how we make an empty list. There are other ways to make an empty list with the constructor um, and stuff. So if you go, yeah, this resource I like a lot that I've kind of been pushing, I feel like a lot. And let's see if it goes up on the stream. The W3 schools is really great. And yeah. So if actually you can probably answer all of these using this kind of resource, which was linked as the first page in Canvas over here in the module, as well as the other one. But yeah, so this was maybe a little redundant if you looked at these. But I will try to answer them right now without looking at the resource. But hey, maybe I will need to consult it. That's realistic programming. And I kind of also was hesitant to have a problem like this where you could literally just look at a resource and almost copy and paste. Um, but I really wanted to make everyone aware of these different operations and kind of methods that were inherent to lists so you can use them for future homeworks and for PUI and all this stuff. Because a lot of this holds true for like other programming languages like JavaScript. So if you're in there, you're like, oh, I want to remove this fifth element from this list, it's pretty similar in Python to how you do it in JavaScript. So just being aware of even what operations you can apply to these kind of data structures, I think is useful. And so that's was the intention of this kind of problem. So make an empty list, make a list with a single element. So just putting the integer 5. Um, Something I mentioned last time too, but Python and JavaScript can kind of have these, they're not strongly typed languages is what it's called. So you can have a list or an array of differing types, which also means you can do stuff like x equals 5. And now you don't have to, change. So this like was an integer, right? And now it's like a string. Um, and you can just, you know, reassign it and it's good. And so that's kind of the idea with Python. So we can have arrays of different types. So this one was trying to let you, or trying to like reinforce that. So it's like, hey, make a list with 3 elements of different type. So we can do integer, float, boolean, string, you know, you could do a list of the list if you wanted. There's a lot you can do there. But that's what that was getting at. Find the length of a list, pretty similar to a string. So actually, maybe I should be solving these over here just so we can actually see them be ran in case I make a mistake. Find the smallest value in the list. So this will only work, I believe, if they are all of the same type, and I think it's .min. So let me try the case first where I think it'll not work. So I don't think it'll work on this because they're all different types. Or maybe it's just not min. So this is where I'm going to go look at the resource. Oh, or is it min? I want to see if I can do this without Googling. Okay, yeah, I think it is min. So kind of like length where, so you can like, there's things you can call on the list, like append and whatnot, methods. And then there's like built-in functions you can pass items into, like we do for length. And so one you can do is min. But as you can see, basically what it's doing is it's going over each item in this list and just saying less than because it wants to find the minimum item. And so, 5 less than 5.5 is fine. But now if it's trying to compare Boolean true to the string, which is string, it can't really make that comparison, right? So with numbers, it's easy to compare 5 less than 10. And with strings, you can as well. So like this is a big string is gonna like less than this would be like false. Um, but doing that from a Boolean to a string, it's more difficult and can't. So min should work though if I have some numbers. Let's do 5, 16, big one, 2. Right, so now it's the minimum item in the list. And let's see what it looks like with strings. And so I think this like it kind of gets me on the course, but so it's like strings are represented by like different bits underneath them, and I think it may be the case that min, which actually wouldn't make sense for 4. So I didn't know if I was talking about the space that is representative of each string. I'm actually not sure how min works on strings. It's definitely not character length, or else we would have got 1 or 2. Um, but I would say it's mostly used on numbers. Um, and I think for the homework, we may use min, or you can use min. But let's just fill this out here. Also, so like if you were just to give some more help seeking stuff on this resource, and I don't think min is mentioned here. So then you could say like, smallest, which maybe I even did, item Python list. And Google has a nice little formatting thing here that will just tell you it's min. So, if you were looking at the resource and you couldn't find it, again, definitely don't hesitate to Google this kind of stuff. Like I bet if you even like kind of put Python and then Googled that exactly, you'd find it. So this one will definitely be used in the homework for this week, um, almost certainly. So that's kind of also the intention with these labs is to get ready for the homeworks, which go a little bit beyond the labs. Um, and yeah, this one is here. Count. So how do you count the occurrences of an item in a list? So we'll do like my list, count, and then, I don't know, item. So then over here, then go my list, count, item, and there's 2 items in here. So you do the same for 1, and it should report 1 out. Yeah, 1 out for 2. So what would be considered cheating would be like for alternate strings. Like I feel like an alternate strings, for instance, is kind of a common intro programming function. So if you were like Googling for something like Python, input 2 strings, like alternate characters or something like that, and then you found like an answer that basically had this function in it and copied the code in there, that would be considered cheating. But if you're like, oh, how do I sort a list? And you like looked up a function to call on your list, that's totally fine. But basically, so I mean, like you could find, so it's like I have my own list and I want to know how to make a copy. So I'm copying like this part of it. I'm not being like, oh, I want to do all this. So I would say it kind of determines by the case, but if you're copying like multiple lines of code, that may be a signal that uh, it's like kind of cheating. Whatever, especially if another thing that gets into trouble, and I think is like the whole kind of reason we have this like don't copy and paste code really and like don't cheat is because it does impede your learning. So like I'm pretty confident both of these are somewhere out there on the internet, um, in some form with different names. I did actually Google both of these and try to find the answer, and I found something similar. So I tweaked the names, and tried to make it a little different. But like if you did find this out there and you just copied and pasted it and submit it, then it's like, oh, do you really know how to understand this like problem? Especially since both these concepts kind of play into the homework, it would be kind of apparent too, and it would just kind of hurt you in the long run. Because for the homework, especially for this week, I'm pretty sure they're not really out there. Yeah, I mean, it's also fine this time, but that's just something to watch out for. Because especially if you do struggle with something that plays off of this in the homework, and I'll be like, well, were you able to do it for the lab? And if I look at your lab and you were, and then I'm like, all right, well, then that part shouldn't technically be a problem. Um, but you can definitely run into that if you are copying and pasting code. Yeah, we can. Yeah, once we finish up this list, we're gonna walk through them. But if there's a certain aspect of it you're struggling with, if you want to type that out, we could walk through it. I guess like which part, especially for these, I don't want to get into these too much, but when we walk through them, it's really nice to kind of break it up like line by line on what you need to do. And that really helps me personally solve it. But yeah, let's wrap up the list real fast. So find the index of an item in a list. So again, if you were a little confused on that, um, you could go look at index. It's also kind of in the name. But again, like for this one, for instance, I did not remember it, so I definitely consult these kind of resources all the time. Um, but yeah, I just did not remember that it was .index. So, item. And again, you can put for this, I mean, this will be like hand graded, but I don't care what you named your list, and like I don't care what you really pass into these. I just want you to know that these are methods that you can call on lists. Add then 5 to the list. So again, you could have done this several ways. I think this is mostly getting at append, which right here adds an element. You could also insert, and that gets at a specific position, which I think is like 2 questions from here. But either works, but just know, hey, you can add items to list. Remove, which For this one, I mean, I would take two answers as well. Since we just kind of added it at the end, you could do pop, which would remove the last item. Oh wait, no, specified position for. Oh yeah, see, that's a little different than old JavaScripts. But you can, I would take pop for this too, but just know that pop and remove removes items. So, pop whatever index that we just added 5 to. So if your list was empty and we added 5 and you put, pop 0, then it would remove it and you'd have an empty list again. Also, if you do dot remove 5, it'll remove I believe it's the first occurrence, but let's test it. So if I have a list of numbers, and let's do 5 again and close it with 10. So now if I remove 5, yeah, so it looks like it is just the first occurrence. So then if I do my list remove 5 again, our second 5 went away. And if I try to call it now, the item's not in the list. So adding in 5 to the fourth index of the list. So I think insert, I didn't know if the language matched up exactly, but insert, so kind of like what we were talking about with a pin. So then you can look at like what to actually pass into it. And I think idle may actually help with that. Yeah, so the index that you want to assert it into and then the object. So we want to add it to the fourth index of a list. So everything is 0 indexed. So then we would do 3. And again, that's because arrays start at 0. So this is the 0 index right here. This is the first. This is second, third. Something that takes a little bit to get used to if you're not familiar with programming. I definitely still, especially if I haven't programmed like a week or something and then I get back at it, I feel like I do always forget the 0 index thing. So something to look out for if your code is not really behaving the way you thought it might, could be the index problem. And then we want to insert then 5. So in this case, this is the object we're inserting, and this is the index. So there it is. 3, 5. Remove the fourth item in the list, which I'm pretty sure is remove with the first occurrence of a value. Oh, I forgot about reverse. Nice. And so there's remove, which is not the one we want. We do want pop. So remove would just remove the first occurrence, kind of like we added 5. So we have my list. So this technically would remove the fifth for this current list we have. So if we remove 7, it just removes the item based on the value. But if you want to remove at the position, then we would want pop. So we want the fourth item, which is the third index. So this 5 should go away. And it does. And what's something interesting about pop, which we will cover, I think, maybe the 5th week, is that it actually does return it. So notice when we did remove, actually when we did all these kind of operations to the list, it did not return anything unless we called the list itself. But pop does. So it not only removes the item, but then also returns it. So that could be of use. Not for the homework or anything, but just in general. And so this one was more of like a kind of free responsey thing. You could have typed your answer here. You could write in a comment. Doesn't matter because I'm not going to be running this part. But so assume we have a valid list of numbers represented by the variable myList, such as this one. What do the 3 values for myList correspond to? Hey, so real quick, someone asked, is that returned by pop usable or is it just printed? It is usable, so you can, so let's give an example. So we'll set X to, I don't know, 800, and now we have my list. So I can do X equals my list, pop, let's remove the, let's get that 4. So we're gonna remove the third item again, because it's 0, 1, 2, 3. And so now X should be equal to 4. Really good question. Oh, good thing. Yeah, someone said I use delete my list 3, which is totally valid. Um, as with most programming things, there are a ton of ways to do this. Delete my list 3 is also totally valid. So now the 6 should go away, and it does. That is a good one too. But yeah, so for 3 values of this, I wonder, was this an OLI? Because it's corresponding to like the, I don't want to like type it all concisely, but it's like the start, the end, and then the kind of step we go over. And so you can kind of think of it the same way as making like a 4 with a range. So you like from 0 to 10 and do like every 2, which is going to be like the start index. You can think of it as the end index and the step. So like every second item element into this element. Can't type today. Oh, I guess I'll, just in case someone watches a bit after the fact, but doesn't listen, try to make these correspond. Yeah, so that's kind of the idea. Just a concise way. Which, do we actually, yeah, we'll actually kind of cover this for alternate strings, because that's one way to basically more concisely kind of write something when you want to loop through a list. But that was it. So any kind of variation of this, we'll touch on. And I believe that was an OLI. I think I actually got that from there. Yeah, we'll kind of move on to number of digits now, which I did realize I put the instructions out of order. Hope that didn't throw anyone off. But yeah, feel free if you do have another like list question or something comes up while we're working through one of these two, feel free to just type it out. Yeah, so someone said, can you explain how this middle value works for the list? So yeah, let's do a nice example. Some numbers. And we'll go to 10. So then let's say 0 to 9 every 2. So we start at our first index and then we go all the way to 9, and it is inclusive, and we step on every 2, so we start here. And so by just saying 2, it's like every other item, right? Because if it was 1, it would just be every item. So then we're at 1, and it skips that because it's the 2 steps, so it's every other. Then we go to 5, skip 6, go to 7, skip 8, go to 9. And so then would skip 10 and go to 11 if it existed on our list, but it doesn't. And what is like kind of great, but maybe not, is I think you like won't get an error if you do something too big. Yeah. So our list obviously does not go from 0 to 20. Because it just, for when you're doing this kind of notation, same case with 4, I believe, unless you're directly indexing into it, is that it'll just kind of stop doing the start end step when you've exhausted your list, which, I mean, you can view that either way. I feel like it's almost nicer to get the error because then you won't be like misguided that your list is potentially up to 20 elements big, 21 elements. Um, but yeah, so then we did 5, it would stop, and then 1. So These are all of our elements. We're going by 1. And I wonder actually, so I'm not sure what it'll do if our step is like way too big, like 12. Okay, yeah, so it'll always get the first element unless you're, well, no, it'll always get the first element of the start. So if we're doing 5, for instance, so we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because remember 0 indexed. So it starts there, prints it, and then it's the 2-step. So it's 1, 2, 8, and then 1, 2. Oh, and I guess I should have made that 10, but right, actually, so I think maybe I did misspoke because then I would imagine that this would, yeah, I don't think it is inclusive, right? Because I would have imagined that the 9 would have gotten it. So to get that, we would have to have 10. So yeah, you are totally right. The end is not inclusive. So then if I did want, so we have, a 10 element array. Boy, this is 0 and this is 9 for indices. And since it's not inclusive, if I did want to get that 10, I would have to make this 10 to go beyond it. Or maybe not. Oh, because yeah, because it skips it. So then actually, I would never, skipping by 2, starting with 1, I would never get this because it's 1 skip. So it gets every other. And so I would never get that 10 when I'm doing 2-step. So that would explain that. What we do there. Yeah, so here's a good example of how to see that it's not inclusive because we're just doing the 1-step, which is every element, starting at 0, which is here. We want to go up to 9, which would be here, but since it's not inclusive, it does not include that item. So yeah, good call. But I tend to, especially when I'm like not too familiar with things, I always kind of write it out in the 4 and then do range. Even though it's like the same thing, I just kind of think it's, I don't know, easier for me to comprehend. And you can kind of do more with the 4. But I will show an example of using this kind of notation for one of the problems. All right, we'll just do number of digits first because it's in the file. So write the function number of digits that takes in a positive number equal to 1 or greater. So we can assume num will always be, 1 or 2 or something. It won't be 0 or negative. And it will return the number of digits in the input number. So if you pass 983, it should return 3 because there's 3 digits, the ones place, the tens place, hundreds place. And if you pass a 9, it would return 1. So basically anything 1 through 9, it should return 1. And then 10 through 99, it should return 2, 100, you know how digits work. And then again, for this 6-digit thing, it'll return 6. And yeah, length does not work since it's not strings. I mean, one way to do it would be to like cast it to a string, but ideally we wouldn't do that here because we wanted to try something else that's not just cast this int to a string and then throw a length on it because we wanted to explore some of the concepts we learned. So we know we need to return something, and I know I need this number of digits, so I'm going to make a variable called digits and set it to 0. Because I'm going to want to increment that by counting the actual digits of the input number, which I deleted. And okay, so I want to basically loop through each digit's place. So I want to look at this one, this one, this one, and it's kind of a variable amount of numbers that could be passed in. So I would want to loop through this thing basically 3 times to get each digit. This 6, so I know I'm going to want a loop of some sort, and I'll just use a while here. There is a way to do it with a 4, but that was just kind of like mostly the same case. Like if you can do it with a while, you can probably do it with a 4 and vice versa. But I know I'll do a while. And so if I want to loop through my number, then maybe I'll remove a digit as I count through it is one way. So let's go with that for now. So, because while my number is greater than 0, because if I'm going to be like taking away as I count the digit, then I know the number is going to get smaller, but I do want it to be greater than 0. And I can, I know number is always 1 or more. So digits we're going to want to add a count to. And also this is the same as saying like digits equals digits plus 1. Because I want each pass of my loop to be counting a digit. So that's why I'm going ahead and going to increment it. And now this is kind of like where the logic gets into. So I need a way to count a digit in the like ones place or the tens place or the hundreds or, however many. And one way to do that would be to do division. And if you remember, which is this goes back to a concept from the first week that we did touch on. And this is just one way to do it. But you could, if you remember, you can do division like that. So, 10 divided by 5 is going to be 2. And then we also talked about this, which was like the floor division, which basically divides and gets rid of any of like the kind of remainders of the fractions and whatnot. And so just for like a refresher on here, let's say we have like 945, and then we want to divide it by 10, right? 94.5. But then if I have 945 and I do the floor division, it just gets rid of that point, which is convenient for us because, numbers work with we're base 10 with our numbers. So I can get the ones place, the tens place, the hundreds place, thousands, so on and so forth by actually doing the floor division of 10 for it. So this was a little tricky, which is why I like to go over labs and whatnot. And it used the concept from last week, but we did also touch on that in one of the videos too. So I was hoping it'd be remembered. So yeah, we can just give another example. So 17. So it takes away, anytime we do the floor division like that with 10, divided by 10, get rid of the remainder, it's taking away a digit that isn't the number. So notice this is there without that digit's place. So that's one way we can count it. So I'll have my number and I want to, okay, so I know that's taking away a digit, but I need to keep doing that. So what you want to do is reassign it. So we call this floor division on 10, and as you can see, it conceivably removes a digit, but then we'll want to keep doing that process. So then we need to keep assigning num to it. So it's not good enough to just do this because then our num won't be linked to it. So if we update num and then we just keep doing it, it's effectively doing this. And then gets that last digit, gets 0, which will break us out of the while. And then I have this digits being incremented by that. And so, and then another way you could do it, I think, is if you just did, so you can always, instead of doing like, digits equal digits plus 1, if you always do it before the equal sign, that's one way. So then we could just do that. But I don't know. I don't like that notation really for the floor division. But now we need to test it. My indentation wrong. Oh, maybe it's because it's the number of digits, 3, number of digits, 5. And yeah, it's always going to be 1 or greater. And I think someone asked a question. Yeah, so you definitely could use length string, And that's what this was trying to get at, that like should not be used for this because we're working with ints, not strings. Um, but definitely I would say that, and that's just because I wanted you to like use a loop, basically. But yeah, you are totally correct that. So anyone not familiar, if we call a string and then pass in this, it converts it to a string, this int, and then we know the length function will tell us how many characters it is. So it's 3. Um, which if you did it that way, that's fine, you know. And so someone said, how would you use using a for loop? So I will actually hold on. I will get back to that on the for loop hopefully, but let me go ahead and do alternate strings um, before, because the alternate strings is a little more complex. But we'll go back. But basically, to do with a for, if you would just do like a for, I don't want to type it there. So in range of, well, that, yeah, you could do it for a string there. So one way you could do it is if you did it in the range of the length of the number. Again, that does involve converting it to a string though. And at that point, you would probably be better off just doing it that way. Um, but let me dip to alternate strings because I think that might take actually more than 15 minutes. Um, but yeah, again, if you do have any questions while we're doing alternate strings regarding number of digits, type them in and hopefully I can get to them time permitting. But really fast. So alternate strings, I would say was the most difficult one of this. I mean, this one's a little tricky if you like didn't remember that. And I'm sure there's other ways to do it. I haven't looked at the labs yet, obviously since they were due less than an hour ago, but it would be interesting to see if anyone did use something else. Um, but alternate strings. So with any kind of problem, especially lengthier ones, I personally like to kind of read it line by line and try to break it down into what I might need. So let's do that. So write a function alternate string, string 1, string 2, that takes 2 strings. Okay, so we have that function header here already. It needs to alternate between the characters of the 2 strings to create a new combined string. So when I read this and I see, oh, create a new combined string, that language like almost signals that I'll need like a new variable. So combined strings, starting with the first character in string 1. And so now that tells me, okay, so I need characters from both strings and I need to alternate them, which at that point maybe I'm still not clear on like what it really means to alternate the characters. So that's why this example is kind of here. So in C space OK and whatever that is would equal nice work. So I'm like, okay, so it goes in, then I, then C, then E, then the space. Okay. So that's what it meant by starting with this first character. So I'll need to go over each string. So perhaps I need a loop. Also, it's loop week. Yeah, so I'll need some loop, and then I will want to start with string 1. And you can totally, if you leave comments like this, it's fine too in your code. Um, so I'll need a loop, and I'll want to start with string 1 and then go to string 2 item, then back to string 1, etc. Okay, so that's good to know, and it'll print nice work. And then you can assume both parameters will always be strings. Okay, so I can assume I'm not going to get like a number input or something wonky. And that they're either equal length or that the first string, so this is kind of a big part. So you'll notice equal length strings or that the first string is the longer of the two. Okay, so I'll want to make a note of that. So string 1 is either greater than or equal to string 2, right? When it comes to length. Is longer of the two, right? Okay, and when the first string is longer than the other, okay, so when string 1 is longer in that case, then we need to concatenate the rest of the remaining string onto the end of the new string. And concatenate would just mean add the leftovers to the end of the string. And so to clarify that, here's an example. So in this loop, we go string 1 first, so we go A, B, C, D, E. Then we go back here and it's okay, there's nothing left. So then we just take the rest of string one and add it in. So then we get, you know, the alphabet. Okay. So that seems like might be tricky. So then I would just say like add the rest of string one to combine string if it's larger. You know, so that's just a note. So it's kind of like, okay, so here's some kind of components of the function. You know, there's kind of maybe three main parts for it. Four, I guess, if you count that. But I'm not going to comment that because we're going to need to kind of print out a combined string. And of course, you can name it whatever. I think actually when I was solving this, I named it C, but I'm trying to use nice variable names since people are watching, which is a good habit to get into, especially if you ever need someone to look at your code. You know, if you're trying to debug and someone's got like C is this, D is 5, E is, you know, hey, then makes things kind of annoying. So, all right. Okay, so now I kind of know what I need to do in a structure, and so I want to dive in. So I'll actually have the comments up there. Yay, indentation. All right, so I need to loop over these strings and do the thing where I alternate between the letters. So I'm personally going to use a 4 for this. As I kind of mentioned too, I think in Tuesday's office hours, I use for loops way more than while loops. So I guess I don't want to say like when in doubt, it's probably a for loop, but maybe, you know, something to keep in mind. So for I, you know, I and X, so I did just talk about variable names. I think using like I and X as like the iterator kind of variable is totally fine in for loops. Um, and I'm not gonna ever like count you off on code style. I will just leave you comments that's like, hey, you know, maybe you should try to name a variable or try to write it like this. But yeah. So for I in okay, so I'm gonna want to maybe do range, right? Because we're gonna want to know, I want to loop through every character in these strings, right? And so I know string one could be bigger than string two. Also, what's nice is to kind of put like sample input here. Okay, so let's go ahead and say string one can be greater. So let's say this is like longer. And then we'll just say this one's, I don't know, short. So then it's longer by what, one letter. I'm gonna do small. And I'm gonna throw in a couple R's to really emphasize how much longer it is. All right, so now I have some like potential sample inputs that could be put into here, and I know I need to get on my loop. So now I'm trying to think which one would I really want to kind of loop over. I mean, I want to make sure I get all the letters, so maybe I want to do string one. But now I think, okay, what if I did that? Let's say string one, loop over, right? So now I'm going to loop over each of these letters and get them, and I can do the same for string two. So to get the first, so we start with string one. Okay, so that is how I would get the L, right? And I'm going to want to go ahead and combine them. So I'm going to want to add it to my little combined strings. So start with the first letter, and then so now I'll do the same thing for string two, right? Okay, and so again, what that's doing is it's taking this empty string and adding the first letter for each of these words. And then it'll loop over it again up until it's maxed out on the whole string, and it'll do the same thing. So then it'll add the O and then the M, and then it'll add the N, the A, the G, the L, the E, the second L. Now it's gonna add the R, and then oh, huh. Okay, well now when it gets to here, so I need to do something about these R's. So when it hits this index, which would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the fifth index, unfortunately, this only goes, 0 through 4 for the index, but this is actually 0 through 7 because it's longer. So if I do loop over string 1, then when I hit the first R and I try to index into 5, I'll actually get an error because, the smaller string doesn't have that index. So, small. Whoop, 2. So that's the second L. And in our case, if we were looping through and we got to this first R, which would be 5, and then we try to call it on string 2, get the index out of range because it's not that big. Okay. So then maybe I'm thinking, I don't want to loop over the one that could potentially be larger. Because, if they were the same size, like if it was just long with an E, then it's, 0 through 4, then we're good. Then it actually kind of completes the entire problem. And it wouldn't matter which one we loop over um, for the range and length since they're the same size, because it'll cap out at 4 and then it'll end. It won't go to 5 because that's the entire length of string 1. So then we get no index problems. But unfortunately, that is not the case because, as we said from the instructions, that string 1 could potentially be greater. So, this works for if they're the same size, but then we just encounter the case where we need to account for the bigger one. So then I know what problem I might run into. So then, okay, I do want to do string 2 then. And I'll loop over it. So now if we're doing it for string 2, I'll start with 0. So, L, S, then the O, then the M, so on and so forth. Okay, so we do this, and then we get what the weird string that's L, S, O, M, N, A, G, L, E, L. Very sensical, right? And so at that point, once we finish looping over, that's what we have. But for string 1, we still have these 3 R's, which let me get rid of the spaces to not be confusing. So we still have these 3 R's to put on here, right? So maybe to help me with that, manually looping like I just did with like this cursor is kind of annoying. So you could also put a little print statement here to kind of see what it was after the for loop. But we'll know, that's what it is. And so at this point, I still need to include the last 3 characters of string 1, or however many it is, right? I can't just always assume it's 3. So now I'm like, okay, how would I get those last characters? So I know we left off, right? So we did 0 through 4 on the indexes. And so now I need index 5, right? And I'm like, okay, how do I get index 5? Well, I'm probably going to need another loop, maybe. This is one way to do it. I'll do the easier loop way first. So I'm going to need another loop. So I'll just do I again in range because I want those last characters, right? And so even if you kind of open it up like this, it maybe gives you a hint range. So start. I don't want to start just at 0. Like I don't want to just stop because I don't want to start with 0 again because then I'd get all the letters we already have. So maybe I do want to start at a certain index, right? Of for longer. So I'm like, okay, well, how do I get it where I'd start off where the smaller second string ends? And one way to do that is the length of our second string. So I want to start at the length of our second string, right? And so let's go over here. Good, string too small. So that's 5, right? So if you look up here, we already looped. So since we looped through string 2, we already got the 0 through 4 index here. And so we already have 0 through 4 index of long, which is here. And so we would need the 5th one. And so when you do length of it, right, it's not like a 0 index in length or anything. And so it's 5. So I do need the 5th index, and I also need the 6th and the 7th. So if I start with the length of the string 2, then I know I can get the proper index I need. into here. And then we can say, okay, well, where do I stop at then? And very similarly to this first one, we can stop at the length of string one because we don't want to index past it. So do I have string one set? Nope. Which was longer. Right. So now we're basically saying, hey, go. There it is. Start at 5 and stop at 8 because remember string 1, right, index out of range because it's just 0 through 7. So, and it's not inclusive as we talked about. Good catch. I did misspoke on that last time. So we'll be fine because it won't do 8. So we're just starting with the length of string 2 and going all the way up to the end of length string 1. And now what are we going to need to do? Okay, so we know this will loop through and get this, and we just need to add it to this combined strings again. So then we can do string 1, I, and then print it. Okay, so this will loop through, and we're just doing it for string 1 because we just need the excess here. And so let's test it and see if that was actually right. Nope. Okay, so we got a string index out of range. And so now we want to, actually, hold on, let me make sure. Oh yeah, I haven't been looking at the chat. I'm sorry. This window configuration is not very good. So real quick, so the difference between using this plus or the equals, it's like the same thing. It's like shorthand. So doing that would be the same as doing, plus equal. I'm just gonna shorthand it, and then whatever that is. It's just this part is shorthand for that. Sorry for neglecting the chat. But yeah, so where were we at? In here, yeah, unfortunately, so another thing too, when you're kind of debugging, well, yeah, we'll just keep it like that for now, doesn't matter. If you get a line number like this, line 56, and there's no line numbers in idle, but if you're using a different ID, there might be. If you look in the, which hopefully you can see, let me move this window. Right here, you can get the line number and the column number. And so this is saying, I mean, it also kind of prints it out for me, but if you click here, you can see in the bottom, line 56 is here. So I'll know that I'm at line 56. But actually I do want it like this so I can make it a little more readable. And what's our actual error? Index out of range. Okay. So string 1, string 2, we're looping over it for the length of string 2. And I'm like, huh, index out of range. That's weird. Well, what is, let me print what I is then and see how much it's running. Oh, okay. So I'm going through 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's what I is. So that means I'm calling, string 1, basically 0 on here. And then I'm doing it as 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 5. I just reset it. But I know for small, my indexes only go 0 through 5. So what maybe I need to do then is take away 1 from it. So then it only goes 0 through 4. Let's try that. Oop, hold on. Now am I actually having debugging problems? That's kind of strange. Maybe if I set it to a variable. which I think I actually did in my solution. I hope I don't have to pull the solution file up. Huh. Let's do value of x. Sorry, too, we're going over time. But I mean that's fine with me for a little bit. Plus now I have to figure this out. Whoop. Wrong notation for prints. Oh, that was an interesting drop down. I don't know how I got that. Value of x is 7. Oh, okay. Actually, I know what I'm doing. I am passing my parameters in wrong. Whoops. So string 1 is always the bigger one. I was about to feel like real dumb if I was doing all of this and I was like, oh my God, I can't even solve this. See, everyone makes mistakes, y'all. Wait. Now run it. Okay. Oh wait, just literally passing the same thing. There we go. Small. Okay. There we go. And now, okay, I was wondering, I was like, we literally just talked about how this isn't inclusive. So don't, oh, now I have such messy code. Boop. Let's get it back to where it was. Yes, loop over string 2. Okay. There we go. So remember, it is not inclusive, which is, so we are getting 0 through 4 because the length of the string is 5. And so yeah, what we were saying for this is fine previously, and we get that from it. And then we get to the case where we do need the rest of the string for string 1, which is the longer one. And so if we start at 5, which is the length, which it does include, so we'll start at index 5 all the way up to the length of this, which is 8. And it's not inclusive, so it'll stop at 7. We can properly index into string 1. And be on the lookout for what parameters you pass in, because I was not even following my own instructions that I even have written out here and behind me. Trying to get my YouTube chat thing's kind of wonky right now. Hold on. Okay, I think I'm back on the chat. So the last thing I see in the chat was like, what's the difference by using the plus equals or equals? If you did type something after that, type it again, just to make sure. Yeah, I probably will be cutting off soonish, but if anyone does have a question, hopefully that kind of walked through the thinking process. And as you can see, when I actually was running into the problem by reversing the variables, first thing I did was let's throw some print statements in to, let's see the value of like I to make sure we're iterating right. And then the length is kind of wonky, which is what I was able to use to kind of actually help me figure out I was putting in the parameters wrong. So, putting the length in there. And when you're doing this and just getting a bunch of numbers, it's also kind of nice to say what you're doing. So like length of string 2. This way I know, and then you could be like, I don't know, I. But super helpful. I did kind of want to touch on the other way to do it. You could do, so instead of doing a whole 4 here, you could just add something like combine strings. And then do like one of these, which would basically do the same thing of like starting at the string length, basically repeating what's in the range here. And so that'd be one way to do it. if you were like pretty keen on using that kind of notation. But I don't know, I like walking through a four. It's a little more natural in my head than doing the kind of like shorthand for it. And plus with print statements too, if you did want to, I mean, if you like want to print what each letter was or what I is to for naturally lends itself to that while doing this kind of notation. Doesn't really, but yeah, so hopefully that kind of clears it up. Again, if you like didn't get it exactly right or you're printing out something a little different, that's kind of fine. I just wanted, which is also part of why we like go over the lab directly after it's due. It's just because I wanted everyone to kind of see the concepts and practice them and then be able to say like, oh, I struggled with alternate strings because I didn't know how to do X or something. It's kind of what the intention with these are. And now you can watch this video as well and go back through it. And hopefully I articulated some of my thinking and like debugging processes with these kind of clearly. But I'd say, yeah, definitely a big takeaway, especially for this, because I think um, in the homework, which is out now, which I should probably post an announcement about, there is a problem that, yeah, I also gave screenshots for sample input. So for this one, I actually did throw in like the one, twos, and the threes to help break it down. Like, hey, you should like, solve this one first, and then you should solve this one. And they each kind of lend themselves to like a loop or something. Um, and so dice games, I will say, is a difficult function for sure. And I think the dice games is more how like a lot of kind of intro to CS course kind of problems are, where it's like a lot of thinking and applying these concepts in different ways. It's not like going to be the biggest function, um, but it will involve at least two loops. And so I try to give some nice little hints here and resources. And the print statement's already there for you. So again, I would say definitely break this one up. And I think just by the nature of language, it kind of lends itself into, okay, this might be a first part, this might be a second. I might need a variable to keep these um, in the form of a list, which I also kind of throw in here too. So I would say if you like have like 5 minutes, maybe just kind of read this before Sunday's office hours if you are gonna like wait to do the homework, because you may have questions with that. And again, for Sunday's office hours, I probably will go over a little bit of that, because I imagine some people will have difficulty with it, which is totally expected. But yeah, hopefully the others aren't too wild. For these on the homeworks I did, it's the same problem, but I want you to do it with a for, and then I want you to do this one with a while. But again, once you solve it with the for, transferring it to the while shouldn't be that hard, but I just want you to kind of see the differences there. Um, yeah, and then this one is about using kind of for and the different ranges. This one's about copying lists. And I also referenced the office hours that we did touch on that, but also there's some nice documentation here that may help you. Whoop. Lost my tab. And then, yeah, and then this for the dice games. So someone asked, can I use functions that aren't included in the chapter for life's homeworks? I was wanting to use a try statement with a void error for my loop, but instead opted for the material. Yes, you can totally use whatever kind of concepts or topics or code that you want, even if it's not covered. Um, the intention with the homeworks is that you can do it with just what's covered in OLI. So I kind of build the homeworks based on a lot of the OLI activities we do, but just kind of applying them in different ways. Um, But for instance, I think even for like the lab, like an if statement would make some of these a little more concise, but we don't cover ifs till next week. But if you looked ahead or you found some other code or you already kind of know that, then it's totally fine to use other things. Like for instance, removing an item from a list, someone's like, oh, I used the DEL and then put my list after, which wasn't covered by any of the linked resources or I don't think an OLI. But that is a totally another valid way. So for sure, feel free to do that. I guess the one exception would be for this, because like I specify in the instructions that like you need to use one or more for loops. Um, but yeah, for everything else, I also think this is likely the only time that I'll really try to force a certain way, and that's just because I really want y'all to see the difference between the for and the whiles. But yeah, otherwise, totally feel free. Um, so the last command line will not work if string 2 is longer. So someone asked, will the last command line work if string 1 is longer than string 2? And yes, it will, because we see it right here. But it will not work the other way around, because we'll get that index error that we were getting right here. Um, and that's totally fine because in the instructions we say that, yeah, both parameters will always be strings and that they're equal or the first is bigger. So we don't have to worry about the other case of where string 2 is longer because we get the error, which I was getting. Um, and I just totally blanked on that. But yeah, no problem. I would say next week we dive into this concept of if and else. And then I think what I would say mostly for like the last half of the class, the remaining 3 weeks after next week, it's more of application. So like, this first week we learned like a lot of like about variables and different types. And then this week we added like for loops and while loops and this like concept of loops, right? And iteration to our kind of programming arsenal and toolbox. And so next week we add like one more thing on this thing of known as like if and else statements. And then the remaining 3 weeks is more like application and using them in kind of like novel and fun ways. And so, we're almost there. So it's more about application following next week. So don't worry, it's not like we're gonna. I mean, there will be obviously new concepts, but I would say these first kind of first 2 weeks, but also the third week too, is more kind of like building up your toolbox, building up your like programming vocabulary, and then actually getting to use them in some interesting ways to solve some fun problems. Is more on what like kind of weeks 4, 5, and 6 are on. But yeah, I will. I'm gonna head out because I do have to run for a meeting that's in 2 minutes. But if I didn't cover anything here, oh, like I didn't cover right that one about for, I can like post it on Piazza if you want. But if someone else does have a question that I didn't get to cover because we're out of time, definitely feel free to post it on Piazza. I guess is ideal, especially public so everyone can see because other people might have the same question or learn from your question. Um, but I guess if it's also private, you can make it a private Piazza post or email me. But also good luck on the homeworks. I added an extra day to it because I did tell y'all I was gonna get it out the day before yesterday, but I ended up releasing it yesterday. And I'll also post an announcement because I'm not sure if you get emails on Canvas when like a homework's posted. I don't think you do. So I'll send an announcement just to be sure. But I also did since I was getting out a little late. I took away some of the functions, so it's only 5. Um, but again, admittedly, that dice game one is a little tricky. It's not intended to be tricky, but it just gets you to kind of apply a lot from this week, um, like loops and lists and doing things to lists. Um, so you can solve it. I don't know. You could probably solve it in like 10 lines, but it does require like several variables, potentially several lists, um, and 2 loops. At least I use 2 loops for it. Um, you can maybe get away with 1 loop. I don't know. Or you could use 3 loops. There's no set thing, which is what that problem is trying to get at too as well. I think it's maybe one of our first problems that's can be solved in kind of wildly different ways and get the same answer, which is the fun but challenging part of programming. It's like kind of like solving a puzzle almost. Um, so I do expect some like wildly varied code answers for that dice game question, but ultimately you should arrive on the same answer. Um, so that's actually one too. Probably after the homework, I will cover in an office hour just to be sure. But ask questions on it on Piazza. I hope the instructions are clear enough on that. I tried to give it an example to show, but definitely break it down in parts. Um, line by I'm like line by line in here. Okay, I need to do something that makes this round. I need to do something that rolls this dice. Which we did for homework 1, which I kind of drop here. I need a way to kind of like average these numbers in the list. So definitely kind of break it down line by line. I think if you're struggling, like we did here. And that also kind of helps too if you are like, hey, I just can't solve this problem. Then if you have something like this, I can kind of see your thinking of it and say, oh, well, actually here like, you said, add the rest string one to combine, but really we need to do so and so. So that's another kind of helpful thing. But definitely look at this as soon as you can, just to be sure. I don't want to hype it up as like some super challenging problem, not to intimidate or anything. Um, but this one's a fun but tricky one potentially. So yeah, good luck on that. I'll have Sunday office hours. I expect to mostly cover kind of questions from the homework. Um, and again, if there's no questions, I will probably maybe lightly touch on this one, or at least touch on some of the concepts that I drop here in the hints. And maybe something with the lab if it comes up. But yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in. Sorry this video went long, but had some good questions, and hopefully everyone was kind of helpful seeing my thinking and my kind of debugging of when I was flipping these parameters. Yeah, see you everyone. Have a good weekend, and yeah, bye bye.